The gate to the underworld was shut, and the guardian at the door never slept. When people think of Cerberus, they always start with the heads. 3, they say, sometimes more depending on the version. They mention the serpent tail, the snakes bristling along his back. But here's the thing, none of that is the scariest part. The scariest part is where he stands. At the gate of the dead. The place everyone eventually reaches, but almost no one leaves. Cerberus wasn't simply Hades' pet. He was the living shape of the most unforgiving rule in existence. Crossover, and that's it. Death comes for everyone, but the way back is closed to all. Cerberus was that rule, walking on 4 legs. People often mistake him for some kind of hellhound, a creature of fire and punishment. But the Greek underworld wasn't quite like the burning pit of damnation most people picture. It wasn't only for the wicked. It was a vast world beneath the earth where all the dead went. Some found glory there. Some drifted in a gray, half-conscious haze. Some faced consequences for what they'd done. So what Cerberus guarded wasn't just a place of punishment. He guarded the entire boundary between the living and the dead. That matters, because this creature wasn't a demon. He was a dividing line. And that gives us one of the stranger details in the myth. Some older tellings say that Cerberus actually wags his tail and perks up his ears to welcome those who arrive, which sounds odd at first. Why would the gatekeeper of the dead be happy to see you? But it makes sense when you think about it. His job was never to stop people from coming in. It was to make sure nobody got back out. In the living world, dogs guard the home. Down below, Cerberus guarded the order of things. He kept the finished finished. He kept the dead where the dead belong. That was his loyalty. Cerberus was never ordinary, not even at the beginning. He came from a lineage of monsters. His mother carried the darkness of the deep earth and the venom of serpents. His father had threatened the gods themselves. His siblings were all infamous in their own right. So when Cerberus was placed at the gates of the underworld, it wasn't like hiring a guard dog. It was like bolting the door with something. Even the gods would think twice about crossing. He had the shape of a dog, but his presence was closer to a catastrophe. 3 heads is the most common version, but some traditions gave him far more. Snakes writhed along his back, his tail was a serpent, and in some descriptions his claws were rough as a lion's. Cerberus was every kind of fear stitched together into one body. The bite, the coil, the size, the sound, the refusal to let go, all in one creature. And yet people tend to flatten him into just that. 3-headed dog. Done. But the myth is richer than that. Cerberus is the most complete symbol the underworld has to offer. He is proof that death is strange, complicated, and once it touches you, it doesn't let go. One gate, one creature, and all of that is communicated instantly. Brutally simple, and absolutely precise. When heroes descend into the underworld in these myths, the journey is terrifying not only because of the river, the darkness, or the judgment waiting beyond. It's terrifying because the very first thing they encounter is Cerberus. And there were many ways in. Caves, cracks in the earth, deep passages, shadowed places where the sea met the dark. People across many regions believed there were entrances to the world below, scattered all around them. But more entrances doesn't make it less frightening. It means no matter where you go, you end up facing the same truth. And that truth always had Cerberus standing in front of it. Here's an interesting tension the myth holds. This creature is terrifying, but he is also completely trustworthy. Cerberus doesn't take bribes. He doesn't bend the rules because someone caught him in a good mood. He doesn't strike deals. He just stands there, forever. In a way, that makes him colder and more consistent than almost anyone else in the underworld. Hades sometimes listened to a good argument. The gods sometimes made exceptions. Heroes sometimes pulled off miracles. But Cerberus himself never invented exceptions. Exceptions always had to be brought to him from the outside. Through music, through strength, through permission, through clever tricks. And that means the real question the myth keeps asking is never, can Cerberus be killed? It's something more interesting than that. How do you get past him? The most beautiful and most heartbreaking answer belongs to Orpheus. He didn't go down carrying a weapon. He didn't bring an army. He was just a man who had lost the person he loved most, walking toward the gates of death with nothing but a song. His reason for going was painfully simple. He loved her too much to stay above without her. Every rational instinct says that what's gone is gone. But myth always begins at the moment when the most reckless feeling imaginable reaches out and knocks on the deepest door. That's what Orpheus did, and then something almost unbelievable happens. Cerberus goes still. No lunging, no barking. He just stands there, held by the music. This isn't a scene about winning a fight. It's more precise than that. It's a scene about making a boundary forget itself, just for a moment. A song so devastating that even the gatekeeper of the dead loses track of his purpose. So the story of Orpheus doesn't make Cerberus seem weak. It makes music seem impossibly powerful. This isn't a monster-slaying story. It's a story about the rules of death pausing to catch their breath. The order of things, briefly, holding still. But myth is not kind. Even the stories that succeed at getting through the gate tend to fail at making it all the way back. Orpheus gets the chance to reclaim what he lost. But in the final moments, he turns around. Just once. And that one turn undoes everything. People usually read that as a failure of trust, or an inability to hold on just a little longer. But if you look at it from where Cerberus stands, something else becomes clear. Passing through the gate is not the same as escaping it. Getting into the underworld is far easier than getting out. Cerberus is the embodiment of that truth. And Orpheus broke against it in the end. Love was strong enough to open the door. But the fear of loss wasn't strong enough to walk through without looking back. Then there's another hero who approached the gate in a completely different way. Hercules. If Orpheus was music, Hercules was weight. His final labor was to bring Cerberus up to the surface. That wasn't just a fetch quest. It meant a living person had to go down into the realm of the dead, physically overpower the creature who represented everything death stands for, and drag him back into the world of the living. The task bordered on insult. It was an order to put a dent in the order of death itself. What makes the story of Hercules so interesting is that even here, Cerberus is not treated carelessly. Some versions require Hercules to ask Hades for permission first, and the condition attached is that he must do it without weapons. That condition changes everything. It's not about killing the monster. It's about wrestling him into submission with bare hands. Hercules is known for his strength, but in this scene, he isn't just a strong man. He's a test. Can a living human body actually hold down the symbol of death? Picture it. Eyes flashing in the dark, all of them at once. Multiple voices barking from a single body. Serpents twisting along the neck. An overwhelming mass of weight and fury bearing down with nowhere to dodge. And Hercules doesn't flinch. No weapons, just his own body against the creature. Some versions say the lion's skin he wore absorbed the worst of it. Eventually he forces Cerberus down, and somehow, by strength or sheer will, gets him to the surface. But here's what stays with me. Hercules doesn't kill Cerberus. He takes him up, completes the task, and then sends him back. Because this creature was never an enemy to be destroyed. He was a piece of order that belonged in its place. The truly powerful hero doesn't erase the boundary. He proves he can touch it, and then puts it back where it belongs. The myth knew that, when Cerberus was pulled up into the daylight for the first time. The story doesn't end with a simple triumph. Some versions say he foamed at the mouth in the light, and where that foam hit the ground, poisonous plants grew. That detail is perfect, because it's so symbolic it almost aches. A creature of the deep cannot survive in the world above, without leaving something wrong behind. The living world and the world of the dead exist side by side. But they don't breathe the same air. Cerberus can be brought up, but he can't truly belong here. What he leaves behind isn't flowers. It's poison. So this scene reads less like a victory lap and more like a warning. Pull death into the open, and the world pays for it. There's a third passage, and it works through cunning rather than beauty or strength. In the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero, who journeys to the underworld, Cerberus isn't overpowered and isn't charmed. He's fed. His guide throws a honey cake, laced with a sleeping herb, into the creature's path. Cerberus swallows it, and that massive body slowly sinks to the ground. That scene does something unsettling in the best way. It reminds us that the greatest guardian of the dead is, at the end of the day, an animal with hunger. And hunger has opened more doors than any hero's sword ever has. People assume that a great barrier requires a great force to move it. Myth laughs at that. Some doors open to music. Some bend to raw strength. Some fall asleep when you feed them. Place all three stories side by side, and Cerberus starts to look like a much more layered figure. He's stopped by song in front of Orpheus, overpowered by Hercules, put to sleep by Aeneas. And it would be easy to conclude from that, well, he's not that hard to get around, is he? But the opposite is true. The point isn't that Cerberus was beaten. The point is that each of these moments became a legend, precisely because they were so extraordinary. A man who stopped the gatekeeper of the dead with music. A man who pinned him down with bare hands. A man who found the one small gap in all that power. If this happened regularly, none of these would be worth telling. Cerberus isn't famous because he was easy. He's famous because the exceptions, who got past him, were almost impossible, and still barely managed it. Looking at the myth this way, the three heads start to feel less like decoration and more like design. Not just for intimidation, but because a single gaze can't guard a boundary from every direction at once. One head watching forward, one to the side, one behind. Or think of it another way. One looking at the past, one at the present, one watching for anyone who tries to pull the dead back toward life. That reading fits almost too well. The myth never hands you that interpretation directly, but the form of Cerberus already feels like a silent statement. Death doesn't move in just one direction. The living reach back toward those they've lost. The dead are sometimes called by name. Heroes test the rules. Even gods make exceptions sometimes. Watching all of that at once might genuinely require more than one set of eyes. And that's part of why Cerberus lingers in the imagination the way he does. Medusa is remembered as a single frozen moment of horror. The Minotaur lives in the nightmare of the labyrinth. But Cerberus is different. He isn't the terror of one specific encounter. He's the terror of the final threshold that everyone eventually reaches. The gate we all pass through, sooner or later. That's a different kind of creature. That's not just a monster. That's the shape of how humans imagine death itself. Enormous, dark, wearing many faces. Nearly impossible to leave once you've entered. And perhaps even welcoming when you first arrive. Cerberus resembles death with an almost unsettling accuracy. One more thing worth noticing. Cerberus is never portrayed as acting out of malice. He isn't trying to destroy the world. He has no vendetta against the gods. He holds no particular grudge against the living. He's simply there, doing his job, and somehow, that makes him more frightening than any creature driven by hatred. An enemy with a motive can be reasoned with, tricked, appealed to, or outrun. But a creature that simply is the rule? That's much harder to fight. Cerberus is less like rage and more like a system. His growl doesn't feel like emotion. It feels like a verdict. No, you can't go back. This is where it ends. That's all. In this sense, Cerberus also reflects Hades himself. Hades is widely misread as a villain. But in the actual myths, he's less the embodiment of evil and more the god who tends his portion of the world with steady, cold fairness. Cerberus is the same. What he does feels terrible, but the terror comes from his role, not from his character. The world has always needed its edges. Between the living and the dead. Between what was and what is. Between here and whatever lies beyond. And the myth refuses to draw those edges as a simple line on a map. It makes them breathe. It gives them teeth. Because a line you can't feel doesn't stay in your memory. A boundary you can hear growling at night, that you never forget. I want to step outside the myth for a moment. Because the longer you sit with Cerberus, the stranger thing starts to happen. He stops feeling foreign. The three-headed dog, the guardian of the dead. These are words that belong to ancient stories. But the truth he guards is not ancient at all. We've already met him, most of us more than once. He just didn't look like a dog. Anyone who has lost someone they loved knows the feeling of standing at a door that won't open. At first you knock, because you can't believe it. Then you scratch at it with grief. Then you kick it with anger. And the door doesn't move. That process has a name, we call it mourning. But to me it feels like standing in front of Cerberus. It's the slow, full-body process of learning that something cannot be undone. During that terrible stretch of time, when someone's death is still just information, and hasn't yet become something you feel in your bones, each of us tries to get through that gate in our own way. Some like Orpheus, with beauty and longing. Some like Hercules, by throwing everything we have at it. Some like Aeneas, by numbing the pain with whatever we can find. And still the person doesn't come back. And eventually, we accept that the gate was always going to stay closed. That moment of acceptance is when Cerberus finally lowers his teeth. Not because the fight is over, but because you've finally understood. The door was never meant to open in the first place. But Cerberus doesn't only appear at death. He appears at every point of no return. The moment a word leaves your mouth. The moment a decision is made. The moment a choice quietly closes every other possibility behind it. These are all small gates to their own underworld. And Cerberus sits in front of each one. No, you can't take it back. From here, you only move forward. The reason that verdict feels so heavy isn't that it's cruel. It's that it's accurate, and that's why people want to keep Cerberus locked inside a myth. But he has been sitting quietly at the most decisive moments of our lives. For a very long time. We just haven't been calling him by name. There's one thought I kept returning to while putting this video together. Being afraid of Cerberus and truly understanding him are separated by exactly the same distance as being afraid of death and actually making peace with it. We tend to resist endings. That makes sense. An ending is a loss. Something you loved is gone. Something familiar disappears. A version of the world you knew closes. So people delay it, look away from it, or, like Orpheus, try to reverse it with something reckless and beautiful. That impulse is not foolish. There's something genuinely moving about love, pushing back against the laws of death. In any age, in any telling, that image carries weight. But myth is clear-eyed. The more beautiful the resistance, the more devastating the outcome. Orpheus looked back. Eurydice was gone again. Still, I don't read that ending as a failure. I think it holds one of the most honest truths about being human. Even as we accept an ending, we keep needing to check. Is it really gone? Is it really over? Is it truly beyond reach? Orpheus turning back wasn't disbelief. It was the anxiety that love itself produces. And that anxiety is part of being alive. Cerberus doesn't judge that anxiety. He just enforces the rule. Maybe Orpheus knew exactly what would happen when he turned. Maybe it was the most honest thing a person who loves before they reason could do. My conclusion on Cerberus is this: if we keep him as nothing but a monster, we keep death as nothing but a terror. But if we actually understand him, if we accept that he isn't a creature of malice, but a faithful guardian of endings, then death begins to look a little different, not less frightening. That would be a lie. But at least this ending isn't chaos descending without shape or reason. It's something that sits in its place, does its job, and holds the line. And strangely, there is something steadying in that. Endings give the present its weight. Because Cerberus keeps that gate closed, the time on this side of it means something. If there were no death, if the door were always open, we would live differently. Almost certainly with less care. Cerberus waits in the dark somewhere beyond our sight. But in a real sense, he is one of the reasons we want to keep living. Fear of endings can constrict a life, but it can also hold you in the present, in the one place where everything still counts. So I've decided to feel something close to gratitude for Cerberus. I know that sounds strange, but finding a kind of respect for what guards the ending. Remembering that the boundary is what makes this side alive. That, I think, is how you take the time you have more seriously. As long as Cerberus holds that gate, I'm still on this side of it. And that alone is enough to begin a day. The reason the story of Cerberus has lasted so long comes down to this. He isn't remembered because he's frightening. He's remembered because he gives a precise, unmistakable shape to something we all want to avoid but cannot. The inability to go back. The inability to hold on. The necessity, in the end, of letting go. 3 things, carried in 3 heads. The fear people feel when they look at him isn't really directed at the creature. It's directed at the truth he is standing in front of. And that's what makes it extraordinary. The myth didn't try to explain death in abstract terms. It didn't define it in the language of philosophy, or outline it in cold, careful sentences. Instead, it placed an enormous dog at the edge of the dark. A creature whose bark shakes you to the bone, whose movement is followed by the writhing of serpents, whose 3 mouths breathe in unison when you get close enough. One look and everyone understands. This is not a border you can play with. This is not a line you cross twice. That isn't just ancient imagination running wild. That is one of the most intelligent ways a human mind has ever found to make fear stay remembered. Maybe Cerberus' true name isn't terror at all. Maybe it's loyalty. He never abandons his post. Dragged to the surface by a hero, he returns. Paused by music, he finds his place again. Put to sleep, he wakes up and sits back down in front of the gate. No matter how much the world is shaken, he becomes the boundary again. In that sense, Cerberus is a monster, and also one of the most devoted beings in any myth ever told. The idea that something so faithful sits at the door of death is unsettling. And yet, somehow, it is also a strange kind of comfort. At least someone is keeping the ending where it belongs. Let me leave you with one last image. Down in the deep, in the place where light doesn't reach, Cerberus is sitting at the gate. He perks up at every set of footsteps moving inward. He bares his teeth at every shadow that tries to turn around. Countless names have passed before him. Countless figures have stood where the heroes stood. A very small few made it through. But when each exception ended, the original silence always returned. And in that silence, Cerberus took his place again. The gate is still closed. The guardian is still awake. And because of that, we are still here, on this side, living out another day.